Anyway, yes, this is my picture of the two favorite guys I've got out of all the photos. The ones with the biggest attitudes and the biggest sunglasses. Getting over our big bad selves, and the primary passage we're working towards is Mark chapter 8, verses 31 through 38, but we're going to go back into Genesis, all the way back to Genesis chapter 17. Starting with verse 1, it says, "When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, 'I am Almighty God, walk before me and be blameless, and I will make my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly.' Then Abram fell on his face." And I wonder sometimes, do we take that for granted? We think about Old Testament, and back in the Old Testament, when they encountered a God, it was a fall on your face kind of moment. Except, when Abraham's doing this, he's doing it in reverence and worship. Later on, when the children of Israel will do it, when God comes before them and announces to them the 10 Commandments, they fall on their face, but it's for a totally different reason. They fall in fear. And they let Moses know, you need to take God and go somewhere else. Because if he keeps talking like this to us, he's going to realize what we are and he's going to kill us. They were afraid of the judgment that they knew they, one, deserved, two, really had no intention of changing over. Abraham's not falling down before God because he fears immediate retribution. He's falling down before God because he recognizes God for who God is. And continuing with the rest of verse 3, after he'd fallen down on his face, and God talked with him, saying, "As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations." And notice what's bold there. I have made you, not I will. Think about that kind of a statement. Not at some point in the future, you're going to, I have made you now. He doesn't have any kids. How can he be the father of many nations when he's got nobody but his wife and all these other servants? I have made you now, in this moment, accomplished. Why? Because it is God that's talking to Abraham. This is because of who God is. It is done. It's not until we move into 6 through 8 when we start hitting the I will make you exceedingly fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you and their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and your descendants after you. There's that difference between the I have made you of verse 5 and the I will make my covenant going back all the way to verse 2. God had the power and authority to say, you are now the father of many nations. Why? Because I will establish this covenant with you and your descendants. I will make you prosperous, not just in wealth, but in having many, many descendants. God had the power and authority to say it's already accomplished and to make sure that it would be accomplished by God's own actions. I've brought this up before. We're called to have the faith of God. When God said it, it didn't mean it's already been done, the covenant, the descendants. But when God said it, it was with the authority. I am God, I am saying it will happen. We as God's followers need to recognize that when we have the faith of God, It means we're going to do something about that faith, just like God did with Abraham. And when we jump forward into Romans chapter 4, we're still looking at that same situation. Starting with verse 13. For the promise that he would inherit the world did not come to Abraham or his descendants through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. If it is the adherents of the law who are to be the heirs, faith is null and the promise is void. And sometimes we don't think again about the words that were used. Through the law. If it was through the law, meaning obedience, meaning doing activity X, if that activity accomplishes it, do we need to have an almighty God behind it? If the activity unto itself was what caused Abraham to have the descendants and be a great nation, or the father of many nations. No. Obedience, the act of following the law, was not what was going to accomplish it. It was God that was going to accomplish it. That's why the faith aspect is important. It's null and void if the law unto itself accomplishes what God says. We know. What does the law do? Tells us what's right, tells us what's wrong. Does the law force the right out of anyone? No. So it's not the law that was going to fulfill what God promised. It was Abraham's faith in God and God's faith that was going to follow through and cause to be. With Romans 4:15, for the law brings wrath. But where there is no law, neither is there violation. And we got to think about the oops moment of that whole thing, because did Abraham strictly obey God's laws? No. God told him, treat me like God. What's Abraham do? Acts in fear from Pharaoh. Acts more like Pharaoh had more power than God did. Even Abraham stumbled. And Abraham exists before the law. Moses is the lawgiver, not Abraham. So as far as the whole obedience and obeying the law, all it could do is tell you, this is what's right, this is what's wrong. Do the right, God expects it of you. You do the wrong, you expect judgment, you expect wrath, you expect consequence. Why? You went against God. The fall down on your face in front of it. God. Not the, he's Pharaoh, he might hurt me. Pharaoh wasn't a real God. Unfortunately, there's an awful lot of pharaohs in our lives sometimes that will bow down to quicker than will bow down to God. When God says to Abraham, my covenant is with you, there wasn't a law attached to that. God said, I am making this covenant, I will cause. Never said anything about obedience with that. What God established with Abraham was not based on the law. It was based on God being God. And that's why we should still be willing to bow down to him the same way today. The authority and the power wasn't based on our obedience or lack thereof. It was based on God being who God is. And that's something we should, I don't have the words for it. We should relish, we should take glory in, honor in. There's a whole lot of things we should do. But we need to put God and what he has given in its right place. Because he didn't do that saying, oh, and if you measure up, if you accomplish for me. How many parents tell their kid the day it's born, oh, by the way, I'm expecting you to become a lawyer, and when I get old, you're going to take care of me, and here are the terms by which I'm going to raise you. So if you're not willing to sign on the dotted line right now, I am not going to follow through on the rest of this. We all get that's crazy talk. Baby doesn't understand. Did Abraham really understand all that God was? No. Old Testament, we got a lot of people who lived with an active presence of God. Did they understand who God was? No. Did that impede God doing right by them? No. God is an awesome God. We should be thankful that what we have is based on His promise. Have faith in God. It's not based on our obedience. Our obedience is a right response to the awesomeness of God. It's the act of a good conscience towards the awesomeness of God. It's the only right answer we have. When we come to the realization God did not start out with a failed plan, humanity's obedience will redeem them. That was never it. And that was sort of a stumbling block for the Jews, because they felt that God's plan made them special. No. Obedience to God's plan would make them a special people. Seeking the God behind the plan would have made them special. But no, active obedience, the law, didn't make them special, because that's not where their faith should have been. That's where the Pharisees and Sadducees were. Hey, I don't see sin because I'm wearing blinders when I walk through town. That's how good I am. Everybody gets wearing blinders doesn't make you good. It's when we choose to do good, not because we have to, because it's what we want to be doing relative to our relationship with God. But God began His plan with an understanding that humanity was going to be disobedient, that there were going to be problems that were going to have to be overcome. And that was going to be fully on our shoulders as to whose fault those problems were. We are the ones who would choose sin. That disobedience was going to require something greater than a system of laws that only told us what disobedience was. In Mark chapter 8, verses 31 and 32, Peter runs headlong against the truth he's been living by. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke this word openly. Jesus was letting them know, this is about to happen. You already have seen how the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they've already been working against me. They worked against John. They killed John. They're going to kill me too. And then we have Peter's response. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. This isn't the answer that works, pal. You can't go and die. You're supposed to be the Son of God. You're supposed to accomplish what I expect of you. Peter wasn't bowing down before the God he had already been witness to. If the one who calms the sea, feeds the thousands, heals the sick, casts out demons, says this is what's coming next, it's not time to have an argument and tell him he's wrong. It's time to shut up and say, okay, and what do I need to be doing with this? Peter was the son of a business owner. He was thinking the way a reasonable person would think. And I'm putting that emphasis on reasonable because what standard of reason is that? It's the worldly standard. It's my standard. It's the standard that says if I want to have a business tomorrow, I don't just burn the boats today. I've got to do the right kind of thing to get the right kind of results. And you dying is not part of my right. Part of my right. There are rules for success, and failure isn't one of them. When we're working from what the world says is success. Is helping the poor success? Or is having the sports car that everybody knows how big your bankroll is the sign of success? Well, we will politely say that helping the poor is a good thing. How many times do we see that used as the measure? We don't. How big's the house? How good's the car look? What kind of vacations do they go on? We got a whole lot of standards that have nothing to do with godliness that the world looks after, and unfortunately, just like Peter, sometimes we're looking too hard after. In verse 33, but when he had turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." Like I said, Jesus is the one that walked on water, fed thousands, healed the physically ill, raised the dead, calmed the storm, and Peter was holding on to what he knew worked. We could do all the things the world tells us will work. We could start saying, hey, every Sunday after services, free pizza provided, unlimited soda. We would have people showing up. We're doing karaoke night on Thursdays with prizes. We would have people showing up. We'll do bingo, and have all these things that would produce success. Is numbers the game we're in? Or is seeking after the heart of God what it's really all about? We can hold up a lot of excuses, but what are we really holding on to when we're claiming the excuse? We're holding on to our own comfort zone. We're holding on to what we understand with the way the world operates, and is that really the way we want things going? Verse 34, when he had called the people to himself with his disciples also, he said to them, "Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." And deny himself. Peter. It's Dad's business. Who's going to inherit that business? Peter. That's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of employees. I need to make sure that tomorrow those nets and those boats are ready. Because if I don't, those people won't have a job. If I don't, my wife and kids aren't getting fed. If I don't, they didn't have health insurance back then, but add on the health insurance, add on the other expectations of what we know it takes to be positive and successful. Savan doesn't just sit out on the street corner holding a cup saying, "Please give, because I want to eat." Savan works, does a job, and we say, "Good job." Why? Because Savan understands that to physically eat, I need to be doing a job. What about to spiritually eat? Do we recognize the same level of effort that it takes to get up and show up at a job? Is what's expected of us spiritually. That if we're not going to invest the time and effort spiritually, we're not going to get a paycheck. Savan knows if he doesn't show up at work, paycheck isn't just going to magically keep showing up week after week. They're going to cut him off. Why? Because he stopped showing up. He stopped doing what was expected. And we get that from a worldly side. Do we get it from the spiritual? That when God calls us, He's calling us to the spiritual. He's calling us to act in a way that goes a bit contrary to, well, if I'm giving my money here, I don't have it to play with. Right. If I'm spending my time over here, I don't have necessarily the time to do. Right. There's a lot of things that we have grabbed a hold of and hold on a little bit too tightly to. I don't mean we got to give it all up, because Jesus, how does his ministry begin? Going to a wedding feast. Jesus took time to go off by himself, clear his head, and get away from it all. Jesus, when he wasn't out with the crowds, was himself back in a carpenter's shop. They went and found him at his home. It wasn't all consuming. It was an intentional action. God doesn't call us to the off the charts, you're giving it all because I'm expecting it all right now. God is calling us to make an effort, to grow and to become. To make that effort for each other first. And we talked about that briefly in class. To those of the household of God first. Because some days we need somebody to come alongside and say, hey, you're looking really, really out of it. What's going on? Because sometimes we're really out of it. Sometimes we need to be the ones going up and saying, hey, what's going on? God's call to take up our cross daily and follow him isn't I'm expecting 100% commitment from this day forward insofar as boom, boom, boom. Jesus didn't die on the cross every day. But he did take up his responsibility in God and take it that much closer to the point of Calvary. We're called to take up our part daily and move it that much closer to the day we are finally with God in glory. That walk begins with baptism when we make the choice to actively take on God as Lord of our life. Fall down on your face. And what that should mean in our lives daily is taking up the struggle. Taking up the struggle to become fruit of the Spirit. It's not easy. It's not automatic. Have to work at it. Patience is a virtue that I some days lack big time. And Vicki will tell you, today wasn't one of my worst days. But there are other days I am letting the car in front of me know, you are so not my happy person. Because my patience is not only about that deep. We got to work at it. Because more so than the guy in front of me, everybody here needs and deserves my best effort at patience. There are so many other things in Scripture that we read that we know we are called to in God. It gets down to, are we choosing to actively strive to become that person? To become Christ-like in our choices, in our actions, in our love one for another. And oh, by the way, believe it or not, taking up our cross daily includes showing love one for another. It takes time, effort, and investment to let every person know that you can. Hey, I was thinking about you. Hey, how you're feeling is important to me. Why? Because when Bobby comes in and looks like he's been run over 4 times because life has beaten him down that much, I need to be aware that Bobby has possibly gone through something that wasn't so comfortable for him. Could be health, could be life in general. But when we bear one another's burden, when I take the time to ask, Bobby, how you been doing? If you're hitting rock bottom and somebody comes along and says, hey, how are you doing? Rock bottom just moved up a bit. We're called to be the difference by the example his son gave. It begins in baptism, and we choose to follow him daily when we choose to act in accordance with the word. If you need the prayers of the church, or you need to take on Christ in baptism, you're welcome to come as we stand and sing.